He told everyone I was just a housewife at the reunion. Next week, I rejected his firm's merger proposal as the elusive CEO he'd been desperately trying to meet for months. 10 years ago, I was the woman everyone overlooked. Now I was the CEO every boardroom feared. And it all started with 6 words spoken carelessly at a high school reunion. The reunion hall buzzed with the familiar hum of small talk and forced nostalgia. I stood by the refreshment table, my simple black dress almost invisible against the flashier cocktail attire surrounding me. My neat ponytail screamed suburban conformity. And yet, beneath that carefully crafted exterior, a storm was brewing. Michael, the same Michael who had been the center of attention back in high school, holding court with his loud stories and endless bragging. He was the type who believed success could be measured by the volume of his voice and the number of people hanging on his every word. And here he was again, at the center of it all, surrounded by a group of former classmates who were still charmed by his charisma. And then I heard it. Sarah? Oh, she's just a housewife. The words were sharp, casual, and completely dismissive. The room erupted in a ripple of polite chuckles, a laugh that said more about social alignment than actual humor. I felt the familiar sting of being reduced to nothing more than the role they assumed I played. But this time, something inside me shifted. It would be the last time anyone would ever underestimate me. 10 years ago, I was just Sarah, the woman no one noticed, the one who faded into the background while the world spun around me. I had always been the quiet one, the one people assumed would settle into the mold of the perfect suburban wife. And for a while, I let them believe that. I played the role of a perfect housewife, carpooling, cooking, cleaning, and living my life behind a veil of unremarkable routine. But what they didn't know was that every moment I spent in that house, every task I completed, every second of so-called wasted time was a carefully calculated move. I had learned to make the most of every free moment. While they thought I was folding laundry or making dinner, I was building something that would eventually change everything. My hobby of reading business books? It was research. Those late nights spent coding on my laptop after the kids were in bed? I was building the foundation of a tech empire. And every time I heard the word housewife, I felt my resolve grow stronger. I could have let it slide. I could have let them think I was just one of them, the woman whose dreams were quietly placed on hold for the sake of a family. But that wasn't who I was. Not at all. I had dreams, 2 dreams that didn't just involve a well-kept home or perfect meals. I dreamed of creating something bigger, something that would have a lasting impact. And I did. My journey wasn't about flashy shows of strength or climbing corporate ladders the way they did. It was about quiet persistence. Every day I made small, strategic moves. I invested in startups, built a network of influential people, and developed algorithms that would eventually make people like Michael take notice. What they saw was a woman at home, taking care of her family. What I saw was the future CEO of a groundbreaking tech company. And all of it, everything I had worked for, was about to pay off. But it wouldn't be easy. No, I had to earn my place in my own way on my own terms. I had to take what they considered weakness and turn it into my greatest strength. I was playing a game, but no one knew it. They were all too busy thinking I was just a housewife to notice. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The reunion hall was buzzing with the sound of clinking glasses, laughter, and the hum of small talk. Familiar faces surrounded me, their smiles plastered on like masks they wore to fit in with the scene. The place hadn't changed much. There were the same faces I remembered from high school, but this time, I noticed something different. The way they looked at me wasn't the same. I was standing near the refreshment table, quietly observing, still the same Sarah to most of them. The simple black dress I wore was almost invisible next to the cocktail dresses and sharp suits around me. My ponytail, pulled neatly back, was the perfect symbol of suburban conformity. I wasn't trying to stand out. I wasn't trying to make a scene. But something in me stirred, something deep inside that I hadn't felt in years. And then I saw him, Michael. The same Michael I had once admired from a distance, the same Michael who had been the star of every high school event, the one who always seemed to have it all. Charismatic, loud, successful, he was the kind of guy everyone admired, or so I thought. As he walked through the crowd, his voice rang out, filling the room with stories of his latest business ventures, his recent travels, his endless success. The crowd hung on to every word he said, nodding along in admiration. He paused near a group of familiar faces and, just as casually as he breathed, dropped the bomb. "Oh, Sarah? She's just a housewife." The words cut through the conversation like a knife, sharp and dismissive, just as they had 10 years ago. The room responded with those polite, hollow laughs, the kind that were more about aligning with social norms than actual humor. It wasn't the first time I had been dismissed, but this time, it felt different. This wasn't just a passing comment. It was the spark that ignited something deep within me. I could feel the weight of the words sinking in, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled softly, the same smile I had perfected over the years, the one that hid everything I had built, everything I had become. Beneath that smile, though, something was shifting. This was no longer about them, about fitting into their expectations or playing the role they'd cast me in. This was my moment, and they would all learn what happens when you underestimate someone like me. As the evening continued, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of purpose. What had once been a night of nostalgia and shallow conversations had transformed into a battlefield. One where I would fight not with words, but with strategy. Michael and his smug dismissal would be the catalyst, the trigger that set everything in motion. They thought they knew me, but soon they would understand. That housewife they saw was about to become their greatest challenge. I was done being invisible, and everything I had worked for was about to come to light. As I stood there, the laughter and chatter of the reunion swirling around me, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. The woman they saw standing by the refreshment table, neat and modest, was not the same woman who had spent countless hours in silence, meticulously crafting something far greater than anyone could imagine. The world saw a housewife, a quiet, unnoticed figure. What they didn't see was the empire I had quietly built. While they thought I was busy folding laundry or running errands, I was investing in startups, learning everything I could about the tech industry, and nurturing a network of powerful connections. Every spare moment, those wasted hours between school runs and family dinners, was used to build something that would soon shatter the image they had of me. It wasn't about being flashy or loud. It was about precision, quiet determination, and strategic silence. I remembered the late nights, long after the kids had gone to bed, when I would sit in front of my laptop, coding and developing algorithms that, at the time, seemed like little more than a hobby. My husband would walk by, glance at the screen, and ask, "Another project, huh?" He had no idea that those projects were the foundation of what was coming. To him, they were just hobbies. To me, they were stepping stones to something much bigger. And I wasn't about to let anyone in on that secret. I had always known that my greatest strength lay in the shadows. While others climbed corporate ladders in the traditional sense, I was building my own ladder, one that didn't rely on the usual rules. It wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room or securing the biggest deal on the table. It was about creating value in ways they couldn't see coming, building a business on a foundation of innovation and foresight. The world looked at me, assumed I was doing nothing more than playing the role of a mother, and I let them believe it. But underneath, I was a strategist in a quiet war, preparing for a battle that no one knew was coming. Each piece of my empire, my startup, my investments, the network I had built, was a carefully calculated move. I didn't need validation from anyone, certainly not from those who had spent years underestimating me. Their opinions no longer mattered. I had spent too long crafting this moment, building this future, to let it be derailed by their limited vision. The world had yet to see what I was capable of. They saw a woman caught up in domesticity. What they didn't see was the CEO in waiting, the woman who had transformed her home into the headquarters of a growing tech empire. As the night continued around me, I couldn't help but smile inwardly. Michael's careless dismissal was just the beginning. Soon, the world would see what I had built in the shadows. It wasn't about revenge. It was about showing them that strength doesn't always come in the form of loud declarations or visible power. Sometimes, it's the quietest minds that have the greatest impact. And as I silently began to plan my next move, I knew that nothing, no one, could stop me now. The game was on and I was in control. The days following the reunion were filled with a sense of quiet anticipation, as if the universe itself were holding its breath, waiting for me to make my move. Michael's careless dismissal echoed in my mind, but it wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. He had just handed me the key to my next step, a step that would reshape everything. I had spent years building my empire in silence, and now it was time to step into the light, but not in the way they expected. This was no grand entrance, no flashy announcement. This was about precision, about strategy. And the first move, it would be devastating. Michael's firm, Roberts Global Enterprises, had been aggressively pursuing a merger with my company. At first, they had no idea who I was. To them, I was just another small player in the market, one they could easily overshadow and manipulate. But they hadn't counted on me being the one to reject their proposal. They hadn't realized that I wasn't just some small business owner to be dismissed. I was the one they should have feared. The proposal arrived with all the fanfare of a corporate announcement, sleek and polished, filled with all the right buzzwords and promises of growth. But as I read through it, I saw what they failed to see. I saw weaknesses, gaps, vulnerabilities. It wasn't a merger. It was a power play, an attempt to absorb a rising competitor and neutralize it before it could threaten them. They wanted to control me. They wanted to control my company. But they didn't know that I wasn't the one they needed to worry about. I sat back in my chair, the sleek documents in front of me, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The rejection wouldn't be simple. It wouldn't be a no followed by polite pleasantries. No, this was going to be a message that would make them question every assumption they had made about me, about my company, and about their own position in the market. I carefully crafted my response. It wasn't a straightforward rejection. It was a weapon. Every line, every word designed to create doubt. I knew their weaknesses, how their firm had recently overextended itself with risky acquisitions, and how their leadership was struggling with internal conflict. I highlighted all of it, weaving it into the response without directly attacking them. Instead, I made them question everything about their approach, about their strategy. I made them see their own vulnerabilities, as if I were holding up a mirror to their corporate ego. The document I sent wasn't just a no. It was a calculated strike, a psychological blow that would reverberate through every corner of their company. I didn't need to explain why the merger wouldn't work. They would figure it out on their own, and when they did, the damage would be done. They would be forced to reevaluate their entire position. And in doing so, they would be playing right into my hands. As I hit send, I felt a surge of confidence. The first move had been made. I had chosen my battlefield, and now the game was in motion. The proposal rejection would do more than just halt their plans. It would send a ripple of uncertainty through the entire industry. Michael and his team would be left scrambling, trying to piece together the puzzle I had just presented them. But they wouldn't find the answers they were looking for. And that was the beauty of it. They wouldn't see it coming. They would never understand the depth of my strategy until it was too late. The days that followed the rejection felt strangely quiet, like the calm before a storm. Michael and his team were still processing the blow, still trying to figure out how someone they had dismissed so easily could have upended their carefully laid plans with such precision. But I wasn't concerned with their reaction. I had already moved on to the next phase of my strategy. While they were busy scrambling, I continued to build my empire. It wasn't flashy or loud, but it didn't need to be. The foundation I had built over the past several years was stronger than they could have ever imagined. Every move I made, every decision, had been a step in the quiet execution of my master plan. They had seen me as just a housewife, a woman whose only job was to take care of the home. What they didn't realize was that I had been playing a much larger game, one that didn't rely on attention or recognition. I didn't need to announce my success to the world. I let the results speak for themselves. Behind the facade of suburban tranquility, I had created a business empire. Quantum Innovations wasn't just a company. It was a force, a network of technology startups, investments, and strategic alliances that stretched across industries. I had built a team of brilliant minds, quietly cultivating relationships with investors, technologists, and innovators who shared my vision. They didn't know it yet, but they were already part of something much larger than they could comprehend. I had learned early on that visibility wasn't always a strength. The world loved its loud, brash entrepreneurs, the ones who made headlines with every deal they closed. But that wasn't me. I had spent years in the shadows, learning, growing, and making connections that would one day put me in a position to change everything. I had learned to make my moves when no one was looking, when the world was too distracted by noise to notice. And now, as my empire continued to grow, I knew that it was only a matter of time before the world would have to take notice. Every business decision I made was carefully calculated. I knew which startups to invest in, which technologies had the potential to disrupt industries, and which partnerships would propel me forward. I wasn't interested in quick wins or flashy acquisitions. I was building for the long term, laying down the groundwork for something far more impactful. I had quietly nurtured a network of investors and developers, each one an integral part of the vision I was creating. They weren't just following trends, they were helping to shape the future. It wasn't just about money or market share. It was about control, about reshaping industries from the inside out. I had studied the patterns, understood the systems, and seen where the gaps were. The traditional corporate structures were outdated, inefficient, and blind to the changes happening around them. I was building something that would anticipate these changes before they even occurred. Something that would move faster, smarter, and with more precision than anything Roberts Global or any of the other industry giants could ever dream of. And as my empire quietly expanded, I could feel the shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew it was happening. I wasn't just a player anymore. I was a force, a silent disruptor, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The world had seen me as a passive, invisible force, but they would soon learn that I had been moving the pieces all along. I sat back one evening, reviewing the progress of my latest ventures, as I realized how far I had come. My network was stronger than ever, my technology more advanced, and my influence quietly reaching across borders. This wasn't just about competition. It was about creating a new order, one where strategic thinking, not brute force or visibility, would dictate success. And soon, when the time was right, I would show the world exactly what I was capable of. The quiet execution was working, and Michael and his team had no idea what was coming next. The rejection letter was ready. I had crafted it carefully, precisely, with every word, every sentence, designed to do more than just turn down a business proposal. It wasn't enough to simply say no. I knew that. Michael and his team expected that, of course. But I was giving them something far more dangerous. A puzzle, a mystery wrapped in a rejection. One that would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about me and about themselves. I hit send with the calm certainty that the moment would come when they'd realize the gravity of what I had just done. The message was simple on the surface, just a polite, professional response to their merger proposal. But beneath the formalities, it was a weapon, a carefully constructed psychological assault. I didn't need to tear them down outright. I didn't need to launch into an attack. No, my approach was far more effective. I would make them see the flaws in their own strategy, the cracks in their foundation, all without lifting a finger to do the work myself. As the rejection message made its way to Michael's inbox, I couldn't help but smile inwardly. This was more than just a no. It was the beginning of their unraveling. I knew that by the time they truly understood the implications, the damage would already be done. Every word of the proposal rejection had been chosen with one goal in mind, to make them question their assumptions, to make them second-guess their own judgment. I wasn't just rejecting them. I was putting them in a position where they had to reconsider everything, where they had to face the possibility that they had made a fatal mistake in underestimating me. The psychological weapon was already in motion, but it would take time to fully take effect. They would initially think it was just a routine business decision, an unfortunate turn of events. But that was the beauty of it. I had planted the seed of doubt so deeply that, once it took root, it would spread throughout their entire organization, shaking their confidence from the inside out. As I sat back and watched the inevitable begin to unfold, I knew this wasn't going to be a quick, dramatic confrontation. No, this was about precision, subtlety. I was watching as they unknowingly walked into the trap I had set for them. The rejection letter was just the first step. It would lead to confusion, frustration, and, eventually, panic. They would begin to question their next moves, their next strategies, and the fundamental assumptions that had gotten them this far. I knew Michael. He was used to winning, used to being the one who made the decisions, the one everyone deferred to. The idea that he might have miscalculated, that someone like me, someone who had been so easily dismissed, could outplay him, was something he wasn't prepared for. That doubt, that crack in his confidence, would be the key to unraveling everything he had worked so hard to build. The first signs of their reaction began almost immediately. The phone calls, the emails, the back-and-forth discussions within his firm. They were looking for answers that they wouldn't find in my rejection. I had left just enough information, just enough room for them to twist and turn, to drive themselves mad trying to figure out what I knew, what I was planning. I wasn't there to tell them. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of clarity. They would have to piece it together themselves, and in doing so, they would slowly begin to tear themselves apart. I watched as Michael's firm stumbled, their confidence cracking under the weight of my carefully placed words. They didn't realize it yet, but they were already playing my game, following my rules, and soon, it would be too late for them to back out. What they thought was a simple rejection was, in reality, the opening salvo in a much larger, far more devastating play. And just like that, I knew I had them. The psychological weapon was working. It was only a matter of time before the full force of it hit them. And when it did, they wouldn't be able to recover. The game had shifted, and I was holding all the cards. The response came sooner than I expected. At first, it was subtle, an email, a polite inquiry from one of Michael's senior executives, trying to gauge the reasons behind the rejection. But I could feel the undercurrent of tension in the words. It was as if they were trying to reassure themselves, pretending they had the situation under control, when I knew perfectly well that behind the professional facade, they were panicking. I didn't respond right away. I let them stew in it. I knew they would reach out again, and when they did, they would start asking the real questions, the ones they weren't ready to face. Their pride, their arrogance, were starting to crack, and soon enough, the cracks would spread wide enough to let the full weight of their mistakes slip through. And then it happened. The phone call came. Michael, his voice, usually so full of confident swagger, now sounded tight, strained. "Sarah," he began, his tone deliberately casual, as if to maintain control. "I wanted to reach out personally about your response. I was surprised, honestly. I thought we were on the same page. Can we talk about this? Maybe find a way forward?" I could hear the desperation beneath his words, the panic seeping through. Michael, who had once been the loudest in the room, the one everyone deferred to, was now stumbling, searching for something solid to grasp onto. And it was a beautiful thing to witness. "You know, Michael," I said, my voice smooth and measured, "I don't think we are on the same page, not anymore. Your firm has made its intentions clear, but I've made mine, too. My decision stands." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of silence that spoke volumes. I could practically hear him running through the possibilities in his head, trying to find a way to change my mind, to reassert control over a situation that was quickly slipping away from him. "Well, I mean, of course," Michael finally said, his voice faltering. "But don't you think you might be rushing into this? A deal like this, it could take both of us to the next level, don't you think? I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from." I could sense the panic in his words now, the way they weren't just trying to make a business case but were also reaching for something personal, something that would make me reconsider. But there was no room for that. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about showing him that his world of control, his corporate empire, could be shattered with a single calculated decision. "I'm not rushing into anything, Michael," I said, keeping my tone even, my mind already several steps ahead. "This isn't about the merger. It's about the future. And it's clear to me that your vision is limited. I'm building something more. Something that doesn't need validation from you or your firm." The silence stretched on longer this time. I could almost hear the cogs in his mind grinding to a halt. He had underestimated me, thought I was just a housewife with no real power, no real influence. But now, with every word I said, I was pulling him deeper into the web I had spun. He had made the mistake of thinking I was small, insignificant. Now he was realizing how wrong he had been. "Well, I see," he finally said, his voice tight with frustration. "I guess we'll have to reassess our strategy then. But just so you know, you might regret this. You might not see the bigger picture right now, but in the long run." I cut him off before he could finish, my voice sharp. "The bigger picture, Michael, is that you're on the wrong side of history. And by the time you realize that, it will be too late." With that, I ended the call, feeling a rush of satisfaction. The seeds of doubt were planted, and Michael, once so confident, so sure of his place, was now in a position where he had to reevaluate everything. His firm, his reputation, even his entire strategy, was crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. And he didn't even know it yet. I wasn't just rejecting a proposal. I was dismantling his world piece by piece, and he was too blinded by his own ego to see it coming. The panic was already setting in, and it wouldn't be long before his entire team started to feel the ripple effect. Every decision they had made, every move they had planned, was now in question. Michael was no longer in control. I was, and this was only the beginning. As I sat in the quiet of my office, the weight of everything I had worked for settling into my bones, I felt a strange sense of calm. Michael's panic was just the beginning. The game was in motion and I was in control. But this wasn't about brute force or flashy displays of power. This was about something deeper, something quieter, something far more potent. The strength I had spent years building wasn't visible to the world. No one could see the countless hours spent learning, reading, analyzing. The nights I sacrificed, the relationships I built in silence. I had never been the loudest voice in the room. I had never sought attention or validation. What I had built, I built with precision. Every move was calculated, every investment chosen with care, every relationship cultivated with intention. This was my secret weapon, the power of strategy. It wasn't about working harder than anyone else. It was about working smarter. While the world around me obsessed over success measured in loud announcements, flashy promotions, and grandiose displays, I had learned that true power lay in the subtleties, in the details that others overlooked. While they focused on what was visible, I focused on what was invisible, the undercurrents, the shifts in the market, the quiet moments that led to transformation. This quiet strength was what allowed me to see things differently, to spot opportunities where others saw only risks, to hear whispers of potential where others heard only noise. I had spent years honing this ability, learning to trust my instincts, to listen to the signals others ignored, and to act with an unwavering sense of purpose. Every move I made, every decision I took was part of a larger plan, a plan that was now unfolding piece by piece. The rejection of Michael's proposal was just the tip of the iceberg. What they didn't understand was that this was never just about a merger or a business deal. It was about something far more significant. It was about reshaping the way the world saw me, the way they would all see me. I knew that I wasn't just challenging Michael or his firm. I was challenging the very systems that had defined success for so long, the systems that had placed limits on what I, as a woman, could achieve. I was dismantling those systems, one strategic move at a time. The rejection wasn't just a business decision, it was a declaration. A declaration that I would no longer be underestimated. That the world's perception of me, of women like me, would change. The power of strategy was not in the outward show of strength, but in the quiet execution of a plan. It was in the patience, the waiting, the watching. While others rushed to take the next step, I had learned that sometimes the greatest power lies in restraint. In knowing when to move and, more importantly, when not to. It was in using the resources I had at my disposal, the knowledge I had gained, to make the right choices at the right moment. It wasn't about winning every battle, it was about winning the war. I had spent years building the foundation for this moment, and now it was time for the final push. My empire was stronger than ever, my network more powerful than anything they had imagined. Quantum Innovations wasn't just a company. It was the embodiment of everything I had learned, everything I had fought for. It was my vision brought to life, a vision that was about to change the course of industries, and my place in them. As I sat there, reviewing the latest projections, I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction. I wasn't just watching the world unfold, I was shaping it. This was my moment, and no one, could take it from me. The power of strategy wasn't just in the decisions I made, it was in the confidence I had in those decisions. It was in knowing that I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I had already proven it to myself. And as I prepared for the next phase, I knew that my journey wasn't just about success. It was about something bigger. Rewriting the rules, breaking down the barriers, and showing the world that true power comes from within. The game had shifted, and I was the one holding the cards. Now it was time to play them. The tech summit was just around the corner, and I knew this would be the moment. The grand stage where industry giants came to present their vision for the future, where reputations were made or broken in a single presentation. Michael would be there, strutting around with his usual arrogance, trying to convince everyone that Roberts Global was still on top of the game. But this time, I wasn't just a spectator. I wasn't going to sit in the shadows and let him dominate the conversation. This time, the spotlight would be mine. I could already picture the scene in my mind. The sleek conference hall, the polished suits, the endless stream of corporate jargon. But none of that mattered. It was all just a performance I was about to hijack. While everyone else prepared to show off their latest innovations, I was preparing to expose theirs for what they really were, outdated, inefficient, and ripe for disruption. As I stepped into the venue, the buzz of excitement filled the air. Industry leaders and tech enthusiasts from all over the world gathered in anticipation. They were all there to see the latest and greatest ideas, to hear from the biggest names in the business. But I wasn't interested in the noise. I had a singular focus now: Michael, Roberts Global. His empire was crumbling, and this summit was the final battleground. I walked through the crowd, my presence almost unnoticed at first. I was just another attendee, blending in, taking in the scene with calm detachment. Michael, of course, had no idea I was there. He was too busy soaking up the attention, mingling with his colleagues, and pretending like everything was fine. But he didn't know that I had already set the stage for his downfall. He was about to find out that the world was changing, and his company wasn't ready for it. The first cracks in his armor appeared during the keynote address. David Chin, his CTO, took the stage to deliver what was supposed to be the crown jewel of Roberts' global strategy, a presentation on their newest technological breakthrough. But from the very first slide, I could see the flaws. The buzzwords, the jargon, the empty promises. It was all there. Nothing substantive, nothing that would truly move the needle. I exchanged a glance with Elena across the room. She nodded, a small but knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. We had studied their presentation. We had already identified every weakness, every vulnerability, and we knew exactly when to strike. David's words grew more strained as the presentation went on. The hesitations were subtle at first, but to anyone who was paying attention, they were obvious. The flaws in their approach were starting to show, and Michael, who had been watching from the sidelines, could feel the shift. His confidence began to slip, and I could see the first signs of panic in his eyes. But it wasn't yet enough. He hadn't realized what was coming, but he would soon. Then I stood up. It was a simple movement, but it was enough to draw the eyes of everyone in the room. As I walked toward the stage, the murmurs began. Heads turned. The crowd parted, and I could feel the tension building with each step I took. The room fell silent as I reached the podium. Michael's face turned white as he realized who was standing before him. I didn't need to say anything right away. I simply connected my laptop to the presentation screen, and within seconds, the room was filled with data. The numbers, the projections, the analysis, everything they had presented as their grand innovation was laid bare. The truth was unmistakable. The cracks I had seen earlier had now become gaping wounds. Michael's team had built a house of cards, and I had just knocked it down with a single presentation. I didn't attack them outright. I didn't need to. I simply presented the facts, The undeniable proof that Roberts Global's so-called breakthrough was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The financial projections were exposed for what they were, outdated and wildly optimistic. The technological limitations became glaringly obvious, and their entire strategy was laid bare as a house of cards ready to collapse. Michael tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His face flushed with frustration as the reality of the situation hit him. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying through the room. "What you've just witnessed is a masterclass in corporate incompetence. A company that believes it's at the forefront of innovation, but in reality, it's running behind, out of touch with the true needs of the market. This is what happens when you confuse loud claims with actual progress." The silence in the room was deafening. It wasn't just Michael who felt the weight of my words. The entire room felt it. The investors, the journalists, the competitors, everyone watching realized that they had been looking at a facade. The truth had been exposed, and there was no hiding it now. David Chin stood frozen, caught between trying to salvage what was left of their presentation and the cold, hard truth of my analysis. Michael was completely blindsided, unable to process what had just happened. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. His world was unraveling in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As I walked off the stage, I could feel the eyes of the room on me. They had expected a spectacle, a show of power, but what they got was something far more powerful, a revelation. The quiet destruction of an empire built on ego and false promises. Michael's empire was finished, and he didn't even know it yet. The real story wasn't just about the merger. It was about the shift that had just taken place, a shift that would ripple through the industry and change the way the world viewed innovation, leadership, and power. And as I left the stage, I knew one thing for sure. The game had changed. And this time, I was the one rewriting the rules. The aftermath of the tech summit was a whirlwind, but it was a different kind of storm. As I walked away from the stage, the world around me began to shift in ways I couldn't have predicted. The silence in the room was the first clue, an eerie stillness that hung in the air, as if everyone had collectively realized that they were witnessing something far bigger than just a business presentation. The room had been split open by the truth, and there was no turning back. Within hours, the media began to buzz with headlines that Michael and Roberts Global had no hope of controlling. Tech titans collapse. The hidden truth behind Roberts Global's failure blared from one news outlet, while another ran with "CEO revolutionizes industry, dismantles Goliath in front of the world." The narrative was quickly shaping itself into something far more impactful than a simple rejection of a merger proposal. It was a testament to what happens when you challenge the status quo with precision, intelligence, and an unwavering belief in your vision. For Michael, it was an immediate unraveling. The calls started coming in, his investors, his partners, even his own executives, demanding answers, questioning everything he had ever presented as truth. They were scrambling now, trying to piece together the damage, but it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing with a vengeance. The internal cracks, the flaws I had exposed, were now widening into a chasm. His confidence, the very thing that had once carried him to the top, was gone. What I had done wasn't just a rejection, it was a public execution of his professional ego, and the world was watching as it crumbled. The fallout wasn't just professional, it was personal. His reputation, which he had spent years building, was being picked apart by every news outlet, every industry insider, and every executive who had once revered him. Michael had no idea how deep the cuts went, how much of his empire was based on fragile illusions. But now everyone knew. And it wasn't just his career that was at risk. It was his entire legacy. The next morning, Roberts Global's stock took a nosedive, not because of a single transaction, but because the very foundation on which their value was built had been exposed as weak and untrustworthy. And then there was me. I wasn't reveling in the chaos I had set in motion, though. No, that wasn't the point. What had just happened was not about revenge. It was about transformation. It was about rewriting the rules of the game. When I rejected that proposal, I didn't just stop a merger. I started something much larger. The world saw a CEO dismantling a giant, but what they didn't see was the movement I had sparked. A movement where women, underestimated and overlooked, could finally rise to their rightful place in the corporate world. A movement where intelligence, strategy, and quiet strength became the driving forces of success. Quantum innovations wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of what happens when you refuse to be defined by the roles others assign you. When you take the narrative into your own hands and rewrite it. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about showing the world that success doesn't have a single face or a single path. It comes in many forms, and the one who is underestimated might just be the one who changes everything. As the days passed, the media coverage only intensified. Interviews, articles, discussions. The world was captivated by the story of the woman who had taken down a corporate giant with nothing more than strategy and vision. But even as the world watched, I remained focused. My mind wasn't on the headlines or the applause. It was on the future, on the next phase of the plan I had spent years building. I spent long nights in my office, reviewing the next steps, making decisions that would continue to push my company forward. While others marveled at my success, I was already thinking about the next challenge, the next innovation that would keep me ahead. This was just the beginning. The future was unfolding, and I was ready to lead it, one calculated move at a time. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had gone from the woman who had been dismissed as a housewife to the CEO who was changing industries, reshaping entire markets, and inspiring countless others along the way. The world was waking up to the fact that power didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be flashy. Sometimes power was quiet. It was strategic. It was patient. As I watched quantum innovations grow, as I saw the impact I was making, I knew that what I had done in that conference room, what I had done to Michael, was only a small part of the larger story. This was a story about the power of strategy, the strength of silence, and the unyielding belief in the power of change. The world had been given a glimpse of what was possible, and now there was no going back. The game had changed, and I was leading the charge. The journey was far from over, it had only just begun. As the months passed, I realized something deeper was unfolding. What had started as a personal mission to prove my worth, to take back what had been stolen from me in silence, was growing into something far larger, something far more profound. The rejection of Michael's merger proposal, the collapse of Robert's Global, it wasn't just a business victory. It was a turning point, not just for me, but for the women in boardrooms, in offices, in homes all over the world. The impact I had made rippled outward, sparking a movement that was quietly gaining momentum. Women everywhere. Those who had been told they were too quiet, too reserved, too just anything, began to take notice. They were seeing, for the first time, that it was possible to break free from the roles others had imposed upon them. The old systems, the outdated notions of power and success, were beginning to crack. And as they did, I stood in the midst of it, no longer as the underdog but as a leader, a symbol of change. I had set the stage for something monumental, but the work was far from done. With each new partnership, with every successful deal, my company, Quantum Innovations, grew stronger. It wasn't just about profit or market share, it was about shaping industries, rewriting the way the world saw leadership. I had always believed that true power wasn't about the spotlight. It was about the ability to make lasting, meaningful change. And that was exactly what I was doing. What Michael never understood, what so many never understood, was that the traditional models of success had flaws built right into them. They relied on visibility, on control, on maintaining the same old power structures. But those structures were fragile. I had built my empire with precision, quietly and strategically. Now, as I moved forward, I was using that same approach to reshape entire industries, to redefine what it meant to lead. And the legacy wasn't just about business. It was about the women who had been dismissed, the women who had been told they couldn't because they weren't loud enough or visible enough. The women who had been told their place was in the background, supporting others but never leading themselves. These were the women who reached out to me, the ones who sent messages of gratitude, who shared their own stories of transformation. And it was these women who reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. I had become a voice for the unheard, an advocate for those who were overlooked and underestimated. I wasn't just leading a company, I was leading a movement A movement that didn't rely on loud proclamations or grand gestures, but on quiet strength, on calculated moves, and on the unwavering belief that the world could be changed, one small step at a time. I was showing them that leadership didn't look like what they thought it did. It didn't have to be brash or arrogant. It could be subtle, patient, and, above all, effective. And as I watched my children grow, I realized that the legacy I was building wasn't just for me. It was for them too. For my daughter, who had already begun to show signs of the strategic thinking that had taken me years to develop. For my son, who was learning early that success wasn't about following the crowd. It was about paving your own path. They were learning firsthand that power wasn't something you were given. It was something you created, something you earned. The work I had started with a single rejection, with a quiet refusal to play by the rules, was now a force that could not be ignored. Quantum Innovations was not just a company. It was a blueprint for a new kind of leadership, a new kind of success. And it was only the beginning. I had made my mark, and now I was part of something much larger than myself. It wasn't just about the battles I had fought or the victories I had won. It was about the doors I had opened for others, the paths I had cleared. The world was changing, and I was helping to lead the charge. The movement continued. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. And we were just getting started. As the years passed, the ripples of change I had set into motion continued to spread. My company, Quantum Innovations, became more than just a leader in technology. It became a catalyst for transformation across industries. We weren't just shaping markets. We were redefining the very essence of what it meant to lead. Each decision, each innovation, was a step towards breaking the barriers that had once held us back. The world that had once underestimated me, dismissed me, now had no choice but to acknowledge the quiet revolution I was leading. I had created a new blueprint for success, one where strategy, intelligence, and resilience were the true indicators of leadership, not loud declarations or surface-level achievements. It was a world where women didn't have to shout to be heard, where they didn't have to conform to the outdated standards set by a system that had long favored the loudest voices and the biggest egos. Instead, we built something stronger, something lasting. As my influence grew, so did the impact I was able to make beyond the corporate world. Through Quantum Innovations, I launched initiatives that provided opportunities for women across the globe to break free from the constraints that had held them back for so long. We funded scholarships for women in STEM, developed mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs, and partnered with organizations focused on education and equality. The movement that began as a personal journey had transformed into a global mission. And with every woman who found the courage to rise, the movement gained strength. But it wasn't just about what I had done for others, it was about what I had learned along the way. The journey had taught me that real power wasn't in defeating an opponent. It was in shifting the systems that allowed those opponents to thrive at the expense of others. It was in creating a new way of doing things, one where true merit, true capability, could shine without being overshadowed by outdated expectations. As I looked around at the world I was helping to shape, I realized the real legacy wasn't the empire I had built or the companies I had outmaneuvered. It was the generation of women who would follow in my footsteps. The women who would rise, not because they were following a trend or playing a role, but because they had learned from me that they were worthy of being seen and heard on their own terms. My daughter, now a young woman in her own right, had already begun to forge her own path. The strategic thinking that I had honed over the years was evident in her actions, the way she approached problems and opportunities with the same quiet confidence I had once had. She wasn't trying to emulate me. She was taking the lessons I had passed on and creating something that was uniquely hers, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give her, to show her that she could take what she had learned, build on it, and transform the world in her own way. As for my son, he had grown up in an environment where strength wasn't measured by how loud you could be, but by how smart, how strategic, and how empathetic you were. He had watched me, his mother, transform from the woman who had been dismissed to the one who now shaped industries. And he learned, perhaps more than anyone, that the future of leadership didn't lie in a single vision of what power looked like. It was in understanding the full spectrum of potential, what each individual, regardless of gender, background, or past limitations, could offer. The legacy I was creating wasn't one that could be measured in profits or headlines. It was measured in the lives I touched, the barriers I helped break down, and the world I was leaving behind. A world where the next generation of leaders didn't have to fight for a place at the table, but instead built new tables altogether. A world where strength came from understanding systems, from recognizing the hidden power within silence, and from knowing that the most effective changes were the ones made with intention and purpose. As I reflected on all that had happened, I knew one thing for certain. The work I had started, the legacy I had built, wasn't just a reflection of my journey. It was the beginning of something far greater, a movement that would continue long after I was gone. And as that movement grew, it would carry with it the quiet strength of every woman who had ever been overlooked, every voice that had ever been silenced, and every dream that had ever been dismissed. The game had changed, and now it was a game that belonged to all of us. As the years unfolded, the transformation I had set into motion continued to gain momentum. What had begun as a personal battle against the confines of being underestimated had blossomed into something far grander, something that resonated across industries, generations, and borders. Quantum Innovations was no longer just a company. It had become a symbol of resilience, of what happens when you refuse to be confined by the narrow definitions of success. It was a living testament to the power of strategy, vision, and quiet determination. And with each passing day, the world became more attuned to the change I had sparked. It wasn't just about business anymore. The ripple effect reached into the hearts and minds of people everywhere. More women were stepping forward, refusing to be hidden in the background. They were taking the lessons I had learned, the tools I had passed down, and building their own empires. And those who had once laughed at the idea of a woman stepping into the arena were beginning to see just how wrong they had been. The media had tried to box my story into a neat narrative, about revenge, about taking down a corporate giant. But the truth was more powerful than that. This wasn't about tearing anyone down. It was about building something up. It was about changing the narrative, redefining what power, leadership, and success could look like. And the more I reflected, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a few strategic moves in the business world. It was about a seismic shift in how the world viewed potential. When I walked into rooms now, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The quiet confidence I had carried with me was now an undeniable force. I didn't need validation because I knew deep down that I had already created the path I was walking. The same path that others were now following. My children, watching from the sidelines, had grown into young adults who understood the full scope of the transformation I had set into motion. My daughter, who had inherited the same strategic thinking that had driven me, was already making waves in her own way. She didn't need to follow in my footsteps. She was carving out her own path, using the tools I had provided her to create something uniquely hers. And my son, who had always been encouraged to think critically, to challenge the norm, was discovering his own voice in a world that was rapidly evolving. They had both grown up in a world where leadership didn't come from appearances or superficial status. They had grown up with the understanding that true leadership came from knowing your worth, from understanding systems, and from having the courage to change the course of those systems. And for me, that was the greatest legacy I could leave behind. It wasn't just about breaking glass ceilings for myself. It was about creating new opportunities for those who would follow. It was about shaping a world where potential wasn't dictated by gender or circumstance, but by the depth of your vision, the strength of your will, and the impact of your actions. The movement continued to expand, each step forward building on the last. With each new initiative we launched, with each new partnership, the world began to understand what I had always known. Power wasn't something you were given. It was something you created. And by creating it, you could change the world in ways no one had imagined. I watched as Quantum Innovations continued to grow, expanding into new industries, new markets, and new territories. But it wasn't just about success in the traditional sense. It was about making a difference, about challenging the status quo and rewriting the rules. And with each passing day, I knew that the ripple effect of what I had started would continue long after I was gone. The impact of this movement, the transformation that was now a permanent part of the business landscape, would be felt for generations. The road I had walked was long, filled with challenges, sacrifices, and moments of doubt. But in the end, it had all been worth it. Because what I had built wasn't just a company, a reputation, or a legacy. It was a new world. A world where every person, no matter their background, no matter their gender, no matter their circumstances, could step into their power and create their own future. As I stood on the edge of this new era, I looked ahead and smiled. The world had changed, and in ways both subtle and profound, I had been the one to shape that change. The movement would continue, carried forward by those who had been inspired by what had been built. And for the first time in a long while, I knew that my journey had only just begun. The winds of change were no longer just whispers in the air. They were roaring, sweeping through industries, cultures, and minds. What had started as a single act of defiance, a rejection that rippled out to shatter Michael's empire, had evolved into a full-scale transformation. The old systems, the outdated notions of who could lead, who could succeed, and what leadership looked like were all being tested, stretched, and, in many cases, dismantled. As I watched this evolution unfold, I realized that the real beauty of it wasn't just in the success of quantum innovations or the decline of Roberts Global. It was in the quiet victories, those moments when someone, somewhere, found the courage to step up and claim their place at the table. It was in the eyes of every woman who looked at what I had done and saw a reflection of their own potential. It was in the conversations happening behind closed doors, where leaders, new leaders, young leaders were quietly discussing how they could change their industries, reshape their businesses, and redefine what it meant to succeed. In those moments, I knew that my legacy wasn't just about the company I built or the battles I fought. It was about the foundation I had laid for others to build on. I had created a space for women to lead, for them to see themselves in positions of power and influence, where once they had only seen barriers. And that, more than anything, was what truly mattered. I often thought back to that reunion, to the moment when Michael had dismissed me as just a housewife. That moment had been the spark, but what it ignited was something much larger than I could have ever imagined. It had ignited a fire in me, a fire that fueled a journey not just for personal success, but for the success of all those who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. And now, looking at the impact we were making, I knew that fire had spread. I had been building an empire, yes, but more importantly, I had been building a movement where the true measure of success was not defined by what others could see or how loudly you could speak, but by the impact you made, the lives you touched, and the systems you helped transform. Every step forward felt like a victory, not just for me, but for everyone who had supported this vision, for everyone who had been part of this quiet revolution. The women who had sent messages of gratitude, the young entrepreneurs who were now finding their voices, the investors who were choosing to back projects that promoted equality, diversity, and innovation. These were the true markers of change. The movement was growing, expanding, and changing the fabric of the corporate world, and it wasn't stopping anytime soon. I had built something far more enduring than a single company. I had built a legacy of change, of possibility, of empowerment. And as I looked to the future, I felt a deep sense of pride not in what I had accomplished, but in what was still to come. My children, watching me with eyes full of admiration, were growing up in a world where the barriers I had fought so hard to break had already begun to crumble. My daughter had already begun to make waves in her own field, and my son, raised in a home where equality and opportunity were valued above all else, was stepping into his own path as well. They were the future, and the future was theirs to shape. What we had started was a new era, a world where potential wasn't confined by gender or background, but where it was seen for what it truly was, a force to be reckoned with. A world where every person had the right to lead, to create, and to inspire. And that was the most powerful legacy I could leave behind. I had set out to prove a point, to show that women, underestimated and overlooked, could rise to the top. But now, as I looked at the movement we had created, I knew that it was no longer about proving anything. It was about continuing the work, expanding the vision, and leaving a world where anyone, no matter their circumstances, could rise to their potential. The journey had only just begun. The world was shifting, and I was proud to have played a part in making it happen. But now it was time for the next generation, the next wave of leaders, to take the reins and carry the movement forward. And so, as I looked ahead, I knew one thing for certain. The change we had started would continue, and the world, at long last, was ready for it.